everyone, and thanks for spending your evening with us today. And Beth, if you could make sure that we leave the appropriate amount of time to answer those questions, that would be really helpful. I am a person who really became a true believer in what the VR process could do, but that doesn't always mean that it does do it. And I think also that sometimes it takes so long to learn how to support your child to be successful at school that thinking about another system entirely is a little bit daunting. And so, what I want to do is just provide a brief overview, a real introduction to DVR. And so, I wanted to touch on what DVR actually does in the most concrete way. DVR helps people with an array of disabilities to secure, retain, or regain employment. And we do this by providing a core service called vocational guidance and counseling. And we do that for the purpose of helping someone identify a job objective that they want and each step to getting that objective. And as you might imagine, that's different for each person because each person has different dreams for their lives and they have everything individual about them, including the way that their disability affects them. And so for that reason, DVR is a different kind of system. If you're someone who has experience negotiating entitlement systems or you know individual education plans, that is not easy. That is never easy. But one of the things about an entitlement program is you can look at the menu of services that someone is supposed to have and you can advocate for those services. DVR is not an entitlement program. It is an eligibility based program and it doesn't have a set menu of services. The only service that everyone gets is guidance and counseling, and the rest depends on what his or her needs and experiences are. So I wanted to move from talking about what it is that DVR does to what I hope we can do together tonight. And so I'm going to be introducing the purpose of VR, touching on some key terms and concepts, then exploring aspects of the vocational rehabilitation process. With a half hour, I'm not going to cover every aspect of the process, just some key ones that I think would be helpful. So, I think one of the hard things to talk about is whether or not it's worth participating in the VR process. I know that there have been times when people have not had their needs met by the process or the system, and it's been disappointing to individuals, but people have also told each other what their negative experiences have been, and a lot of questions have been raised about who DVR serves and do people with disabilities who have more severe disabilities get employment and get good services from DVR. And I guess what I wanted to say is that some of the frustrations that people experience and some of the negative experiences that they've had are valid and the frustrations are real. And I'm not going to gloss over that because that is part of the experience. But there are also tremendous possibilities in the system. And so, really, only you can decide for yourself if you think it's worth it. Here are some of the reasons why I think it is worth trying, and it is particularly worth trying right now. DVR does not have a waiting list for services. We're happy to have applicants and we have capacity to serve people without a delay in service on the waiting list. So that's one thing to note. Secondly, there are some really exciting things happening that I think are particularly germane to parents of young people and young people who want to build careers. So some of those things are that the federal law that creates our program was reauthorized. And rather than just tinkering around the edges, this was a whole new law and some serious significant changes in the law. And some of those changes are directly about youth. So the law makes it so that VR can serve people as young as 14 years old. For the first time in the history of the VR law, 15% of program dollars are going to be set aside to serve young people. Supported employment cases can be open for significantly longer, and there is a new option for DVR to cover a wide array of pre-employment transition services. So those things are all hopeful. DVR has done a lot of work to become a better system over the past couple of years, and we're well on our way to that. Some of you might know about the School to Work Alliance program, and that program doesn't meet the needs of every transitioning young person, but under the new law, we are working to align those School to Work Alliance program contracts with the pre-employment training services, transition services that we'll be able to offer. So that's another positive development. And in Colorado, Colorado is one of the 6 states that is participating in a cutting edge research project about employment for young people, and it's called Aspire. And Aspire is really exciting because it's wraparound coordinated support services. 400 young people are participating, 200 are part of the control group, and 200 are actually receiving interventions from the Aspire program, things like learning self-determination, a little bit of financial literacy, learning about college and how to succeed in school, and getting a paid work experience before they leave. So this time frame is going to become one where DVR is going to be focusing more and more on supporting young people to go to work. And I think that's a positive development. So I think it may be worth it. And it can be worth it if you have tools and knowledge about the system. Part of the reason why I think it's worth it is because DVR has great flexibility in terms of what it can pay for, more than most systems. And it's still the best system in government to support people with disabilities to become employed. So that's exciting. So what really is the VR process? I've I've included preparation because I think people always need to learn how to navigate a system, just learn some basic vocabulary and what the system is for and how it works. So I count preparation as part of the process. The next step is intake and orientation, and that happens at one of our 26 local offices plus 3 satellite offices. Then there is application and eligibility determination, followed by plan development, plan implementation, and then closure. And for the for the sake of time tonight, we're going to focus on one of 3 elements involved in eligibility determination and plan development, because I think that will help you understand what is possible in the process. And so it may be helpful to have some vocabulary in the back of your mind. And so I want to talk to you about what an employment goal is. Everything in the VR process hinges on what somebody's employment goal is. And I think what is important to know is that you want to make a specific employment goal, but not too narrow and not too broad. So it's really about finding the sweet spot. And this is the outcome of assessments and of the discovery process that identifies what kind of paid employment aligns with the student or the applicant's strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, interests, and informed choices. Not to mention factoring the ways that disability intersects with their work environment and ability to complete job tasks. So when I mention strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, interests, and informed choice, at DVR we call that the Big Eight. Those are words from the law, and so the plan that somebody creates and the goal that they create is supposed to be reflective of those strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, interests, and informed choice. You may you may want to know that those factors are not considered until the person is determined eligible. So some additional terms you want to be aware of. You may hear the phrase competitive employment, and competitive employment means that someone earns minimum wage or more for their labor while they're working. And another key concept is integrated employment. So integrated employment means paid work where people of all abilities work together in the same setting as peers. And there have been other models of employment in the past, and some people are still participating in those models. But really, what we're working for and what DVR supports is competitive, integrated employment. And there's different models of employment for people depending on what their needs are. And so, some people have abilities that are consistent with participating in typical work models, and some people may need more support. So in 1986, in the Rehabilitation Act and in that reauthorization, supported employment was introduced as a desired outcome within the VR process. And supported employment is a model of employment designed for individuals with developmental or other significant disabilities who require on the job training and long term support in order to fulfill their job duties. And so that creates different options for people with who have strengths but who present them in different ways. And customized employment is a second model, which can be part of supported employment. It's a blend of strategies, services, and supports designed to increase employment options for job seekers with complex needs. And so, what I want to do is explain, let's say that there are 10 required job duties on a job description. And let's say that somebody would be really strong and able to do 7 of them, but that the other 3 are not part of their abilities. Then, with voluntary negotiation with the employer, someone can ask if doing the 7 still meets enough of the employer's needs while meeting the needs of the job seeker. So that's what we mean when we talk about customized employment. Okay, and so one of the things that anyone should know about the VR process is there are multiple ways to get back on track in the process if you've hit a bottleneck or you disagree with a decision. And I think it's important to know what those are. And so DVR typically does group orientations, and depending on a person's abilities or their own adjustment to disability, group orientation may not be the best match. You do have the right to request individual orientation if that is a preference. It is possible that if you're not a good match with your counselor or your office, you can transfer counselors and offices. It does involve a supervisor and a decision, and changing offices does require the receiving office to. I was introducing the idea of what kind of options you have, what kind of rights to make your process as successful as possible. So one of them is individual orientation or group orientation. Typically, DVR does group orientation. If you have a disability where working in a group is not easy for you, you have the right to request individual orientation. It's possible to request to work with another counselor or even sometimes to work in a different office. But I would advise you that data reflects that the more times that someone has changing counselor and shifts offices, the less likely they are to actually succeed in their case. So it's just something to think about. Um, it is possible to have mediation on your case if you want, but for what it's worth, my own opinion is that mediation is probably not as effective as some of the other avenues for getting resolution in your case. Um, there are two ways that I think are pretty important to know about. One is informal review, and what that means is that anytime a decision is made in the case that you don't agree with, you do have a right within 30 days of the disputed decision to start the informal review process. And what that entails is asking first for the counselor's supervisor to please review the case, and then when he or she makes a decision about whether the option was appropriate or not, if you don't like that decision, you can appeal to the supervisor's supervisor all the way up to the deputy of field services. So that's one option. The second is to request a formal review. And what I want you to know is that this is a binding judicial process through the Office of Administrative Courts. And this requires someone to submit a written request for a fair hearing through the Office of Administrative Courts within 90 days of the disputed decision on their case. That's a hard deadline and it's in statute, so it's something to know about. And finally, under Title I, Section 112 of the Rehabilitation Act, the Client Assistance Program was established. And the Client Assistance Program is independent of every DVR program and receives funding directly from RSA, the Rehabilitation Services Administration, which is the administration within the U.S. Department of Education where VR is housed, and CAP has statutory authority to look at individual case concerns. So those are the options that you have for redress. And now we can just move right into our focus on a couple of areas of the vocational rehabilitation process tonight. So I realize that a lot of people on this call have a range of experience. So some of you may be people with disabilities who are considering whether to use the VR process yourself. And some of you may have school-age children who have developmental disabilities that don't have intellectual components to those disabilities. And some of you may have children with intellectual components to their disabilities and a variety of other circumstances and needs. Or your child may have already graduated from college and may be much older, and it's hard to think about a way to present information that meets all of those needs, which is part of why I'm excited about your questions. But I just want to hit on one element of eligibility determination. So eligibility determination is made after orientation, intake, and after someone applies for services. And the eligibility determination period can be up to 60 days, and after that it's supposed to be determined already. And in the eligibility determination process, a few things to know. Only a VR counselor can determine someone eligible for services. That's a non-delegable responsibility of the counselor. And every counselor who's making that decision is required to answer 3 questions. One question is, does the applicant have a disability? And when that might seem kind of obvious, but sometimes people don't have documentation, and so in order for them to be seen as someone with a disability, it does need to be documented. But it is also possible if you need testing to possibly have DVR help with that. So, does the person have a disability? Does the disability, this is pathological language, it's medical language, but it is the language in the law. Does the disability create an impediment to employment? And I think a better way to think of that, or terms that maybe are more conversational, is how does the applicant's disability interact and intersect in the work environment and impact the ability to complete job tasks? So that is the second question. Usually those 2 questions are not hard to answer. It's the third question that can get sticky for people, and it's, can the applicant benefit from DVR services? And in some ways, you kind of think, well, doesn't anybody who applies, or isn't anyone who applies able to benefit? And really what that question means in layman's terms is, does the counselor believe that DVR can offer goods, services, or supports that actually mitigate the person's impediments to employment? And so some people have heard that maybe they're not employable. That's the way the message has come across. I want to make a distinction. Nobody can tell anyone whether they're employable or not. They can tell you whether or not they know how to offer a service that would mitigate your barriers to employment. And I have to tell you that if you ever are going through this process and you hear that you can't benefit from services, or if that's the primary question, I encourage you to always appeal that through the informal or the formal review process. It's really important, and it's your right to appeal that. And at least while the Workforce Investment Act regs are in place, because in 1998 the Rehabilitation Act was incorporated into the Workforce Investment Act, and the Workforce Investment Act, when it was reauthorized, it became the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act. So anyway, my point is, you have the right to appeal, and you should, if you hear that you can't benefit from services. And so now I want to move into the meat of the VR process. And it's taking a closer look at plan development, because plan development is the core of the VR process. And one of the really key parts of that process is when somebody identifies and agrees to an employment objective. So together, the counselor and the participant have to agree on the employment objective, and I want to explain what is involved in determining what that is. So within this effort, the person goes through a process that's called discovery, and it's just kind of learning what kind of jobs are available, what they might like, asking questions about certain jobs. Sometimes people visit certain employment sites. Sometimes they do informational interviews. There's a lot of different ways that people go through discovery, and particularly for young people who are new to the idea of working, I think discovery is a really important part of the process. And the second part of that is a number of assessments and tests. And frankly, I think sometimes for customers, this is a hard part of the process, because if the goal of the process is to encourage you to go to work, it is counterintuitive in some ways to focus so much on the areas where a person has difficulty up front. Many of us have the experience of having so many labels that we don't want to recount them all, but It's really important to have good assessments. And the reason is because the goal of the process is to understand what the person does well and to plan for things that are harder for the person to achieve. So, assessment is one way to do that. And additionally, I think it's really strategic to maximize other people's resource. So, if someone has to pay for a neuropsych evaluation on their own insurance or out of their own pocket, that's really expensive. If DVR can pay for that to give you the information, that may be advantageous. So there are reasons to take assessment seriously. Okay, and then after that discovery and those assessments, the counselor and the customer begin to compile information to kind of narrow down what types of employment would appeal to the person, what types of employment are consistent with their strengths, abilities, capabilities, interests, concerns, and informed choice. And that moment when a person determines their employment goal is very important. There's almost nothing more important in the process until you actually get a job than the moment that you determine your employment goal. Because everything that follows in the VR process is designed to help a person achieve that particular employment goal. And so that's why finding the right balance between specificity and broadness is important. It's also important to know that an individual plan for employment is not a contract. It's something that can be amended, and it's a plan for service. So once you determine your employment goal, then each strategy, good, or service, support, whatever is included in the plan, is a step in helping you achieve that particular employment outcome. And so when that has happened, then what you do is you sign the plan. And when you sign the plan, your legal status with the program changes. That is your plan, and you're working toward it. And one of the really key things is to keep communication going back and forth between you and the counselor, but also to show that you're making progress on achieving those goals, providing updates, um, and not losing your momentum, I think is really important. And I will say that one fair criticism of the VR process is that, since there's no menu of services, it's a little bit hard to know what to ask for. But the key thing is the VR process, one of the good things about it that is also a hard thing is that it really requires participant engagement and leadership, because DVR doesn't get people a job. People get themselves a job, and DVR is a partner in that process. And so I just wanted to touch on those things. And I wanted to let you know that supported employment is one of the options that people can, engage in as they're learning about discovery and their skills. It may be the most appropriate model. It's very successful, and I happen to be fortunate in coming from a state that has distinguished itself with regard to supported employment as successful. And I can tell you with 100% certainty that people with very, very significant disabilities can enjoy employment and be successful at work and and earn a decent wage. It's harder. People face more discrimination, no doubt about it. And that's part of something that we all have to work on together. But another thing that I think is really important to know is that supported employment, more than other forms of employment, I think requires greater coordination between systems. And when I say that, what I mean is it may require coordination between the school and the parent and the student and the Division of Intellectual and Developmental Disability and maybe a community centered board. And that takes a fair amount of effort. So we can talk about how that happens. But I don't want to take up all of our time together on hearing my own voice. So let's just quickly move forward on this. That's pretty much my quickest possible, most basic presentation of the VR process. And now we can make it useful to you by answering your questions. So thank you so much for listening and being patient. I'm not very good at webinars, so we'll see about
Joelle,
that.
this is
But
Beth. You are doing a great job, and I just wondered if you would want to, or I can tell folks about the Files Pod that Joelle has provided some information there. And I'm gonna, just a second, Joelle.
asked of options for assessments, and that we do have assessments that are for people that are nonverbal. And even though everybody doesn't speak, it doesn't mean that everybody doesn't communicate. And this is one thing I really wanted to say, which is that if you have so many details going on in your life and there are so many efforts underway to meet the needs of your son or daughter, and if it's feeling like it's hard to separate all of the different responsibilities, if you could focus on one thing that was a pre employment skill, I would strongly encourage you to focus on expressive and receptive communication development in whatever ways that works for the young person in your world, because it's a different world than it was. Presently, there are 250 apps that are available, mostly from Apple, or that are that are compatible with Apple products like the iPhone or the iPad. And there is a national expert named Jane Farrell, and Jane Farrell Consulting keeps a list that is updated every 6 months of assistive augmentative communication apps. And I tell you, people that have really been left out of most opportunities in the past are finding new ways to participate. And the sooner that someone can get access to those tools and to learn how to use them, the better. And in Colorado, we're very fortunate. There's a active, engaged group of parents called Parents on the Forefront of Technology. And Catherine Carroll and Alice, I think Alice's last name is Boussard, but I might be wrong. She's from Grand Junction, and she's very knowledgeable, more knowledgeable than most people who claim expertise about how to make communication possible and practical for people that haven't had the best options in the past. I would also say that whatever level of communication someone has, if you can teach very basic lessons, like let's say someone can talk, teaching them how to answer the phone, what phone etiquette is, what kind of information is appropriate to give on the phone, maybe how to capture a message. All of those things are good for people to know for a variety of reasons in their lives. But, it's also a transferable work skill. So I think that's important. So I'm seeing a question that says, is there a change for VA services? So if you're talking, I'm wondering if you're talking about Veterans Administration VA VR. So the Veterans Administration does have a VR program open to members of the military that have had service related disabilities. Is that what you're asking? Because I don't want to go off track if I'm wrong. How do we find out this group of parents on the forefront of technology? Okay, well, I'm glad that you asked, because they actually have a website. So you can just look up Parents on the Forefront of Technology, and you will find their website. They host an annual conference, and I happened to attend it, and it was very good. I would strongly suggest looking at it. No, is there a charge? Okay, is there a charge for VR services? Well, most of the time there isn't, but for certain services, we do conduct a financial needs analysis, and that I can talk to you in more detail, but not every service is like that. For example, if someone is seeking to attend college, they may end up DVR may pay for some of the college, and depending on their means, the person may be asked to pay for some. Is this program in all Colorado school districts? So if you're talking about Parents on the Forefront of Technology, that program, that is an organization, a nonprofit organization that was founded by a group of ambitious parents that wanted to expect better for their children, and sometimes they definitely they might be able to do presentations for school districts. I don't know if they have the capacity or the presence to work in school districts. DVR does collaborate in a number of ways at school, in school districts. Um, so our Aspire research grants caseworkers um, are definitely involved with schools and helping families and young people understand how to be successful in school. And the School to Work Alliance program is a long time program in DVR that is designed to meet the needs of people who are between the ages of 15 and 25 years old, who may have lower educational attainment, and who need mild to moderate support finding work. And for some people, that doesn't really address their needs, but that is one of the major ways that DVR is present in school. So I wanted to talk about DVR paying for college. So a few things. Um, if anyone is going to ask for training or education in their plan, that is completely fine for you to ask for. DVR can pay for certificates, it can pay for community colleges, it can pay for undergraduate degrees, master's degrees, and it can even pay for PhDs, doctorates. But each of those decisions depends on what the person's individual skills and abilities are, and it does require additional approval beyond the counselor for degrees that are going beyond community college, but that's entirely possible. DVR has policies in place now that require us to prioritize in-state colleges whenever possible. An example of one that might not be appropriate, my own nephew, he goes to Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., and there isn't any place like Gallaudet in Colorado. So, it's a different kind of educational experience and not one that's here. He could apply for an exception to policy to ask for support to go to Gallaudet because it's the only 4-year university liberal arts college in the world that offers curriculum in sign language. So that's an example. But DVR cannot pay for any tuition out of the US. And we do have an obligation to go with least cost options unless there's a rehab need that's specific that the least cost option doesn't really meet the need. So does that help a little bit with understanding DVR's ability to pay for college? Okay, it looks like that question is square. Now, from my experience, knowledge, or knowledge are individuals with cognitive disabilities typically successful in using DVR? You know, I I have the framework of typical success is kind of a hard one for me because I don't think there's just ever one kind of person with a cognitive disability. What I can tell you is that in the last year, 26% of DVR's customer base includes people with cognitive disabilities. And so I have seen people be successful with cognitive disabilities at the DVR process. And I have definitely seen um, that people can work and be employed and have, you know, a great deal of success. There's a few things. Um, I don't think anybody, I don't think it's a good idea for anybody to settle too quickly for something that they don't want. And so if someone is encouraging an employment objective that doesn't align with what you really want, then I would strongly encourage you to keep working through the process until you get an employment objective that you want. And another challenge is to get the number of hours that you want. If somebody offers you, says, well, we can close your case, you've got, 2 hours a week of employment, I would really strongly encourage you to push back and say that that is not an example of you working up to your maximum capacity. It's true that not everyone can work 40 hours a week, but many people can work a lot more and want to. So I don't want you to think that that cannot be true for people with cognitive disabilities. And there are some real champions in this state of effective, positive, supported employment. And because those outcomes are time intensive and take a lot of energy, DVR counselors frequently do contract with vendors that help with that service. And you have the right to choose from a list of vendors. And you can ask for information about the vendors and their success rates. And you can also talk to other parents and families about what their experience with different vendors is. So I think that will be good. Um, and I'm looking at these questions. Just I don't have my glasses on and it's really little. I'm sorry. One second. Um, your son will be going to transition. Do I need to go to DVR to start a process? Oh, no, I think you've asked a really good question. Where do you start? And that can be a very concrete answer or a very abstract answer. And I'll try to provide both. I think it's essential that from the earliest possible age that you're helping your child and the people surrounding your child to establish employment as an expectation. And I think being explicit about that, both with your child over time and with every one of his teachers, paraeducators, OTs, PTs, speech therapists, other supportive adults in his life is really important. And I think that making the maximum use of the individual education plan is important. And within that plan, working on communication goals and working on goals that can be transferable skills for employment is strategic. And I think letting the teachers know that that is part of what you want in the plan is a good advocacy strategy. You do have to apply for DVR services in order to start that process, but there's a lot of steps leading up to that. And you can apply as early as age 14 for your son or your daughter. And I think that there are phases to go through um, leading up to that decision. And some of my suggestions are really, really basic. And I don't mean them to be condescending at all. But, really from birth to 6, beginning to just um, give people opportunities to communicate and to practice communication in whatever format works for them, and to practice listening and to practice taking turns talking or communicating, I think is important. And also, um, one of the things that I've noticed about being a person with a disability myself is just that it can be very easy to be a passive participant in your life because, you know, maybe somebody comes in and helps you get dressed in the morning and you just kind of wake up and are quiet and are going through the routine and not really engaging. I think the sooner that a person with a disability can learn to engage in their own life and make decisions in the best way they can. Really basic decisions when they're very little children, like do you want milk or juice? Do you want to wear these shoes or those shoes? It's a way of engaging someone. And then sharing with them, if you have a job outside of the house, what that job is, what do you do? You know, Telling them about jobs that other people in the family have. I think it's important because children see their parents go to work and that helps them establish their own expectation of work. And then from 6 to 12, it gets a little different. Start asking them about their interests and thinking about ways that you can support them to develop interests. And, you know, initially, under the age of 12, very simple, very basic volunteer opportunities. Time limited. I'm talking about if the neighbor's going out of town, can you guys pick up that person's mail together? And, or can you donate food to a food drive? I think having someone see that other people have needs and that they can participate in the community is a great way to talk about work because for some people work is really part of their purpose. So so I have a question here about um, disabilities making it difficult for individuals to navigate VR. For instance, autism and so forth that involves executive functioning, um, and so forth. Yes, there are things about the VR process that aren't very easy for people with any kind of disability to actually navigate, and it does require a lot of follow through. That's one of the ways that the counselor determines whether the person is making progress toward their employment goal. And that's how they decide whether or not to keep the case open or closed. So, going back to those apps, um, I've seen some amazing reminders and tools for people to help them keep track of things and to support them to check in and express themselves. And I think it's possible for your child to work with the client assistance program and to collaborate with peers on things like job clubs. We definitely serve people with autism. In fact, I know that in the Golden area, one of our business outreach specialists has really been looking at emerging opportunities for people with autism in the tech industry because some companies are really excited about having employees who bring the strengths that people that have autism sometimes do. And I know that, Google will be locating in Boulder. So, I think there's a lot of options. So, I know that a lot of people are asking about autism. And um, I have a question from Debbie. She has some individuals with autism on her caseload. Before employment happens, they have a hard time staying in contact. Yeah, I think um, one of the things about disability that applies no matter which one you have is that it's actually a huge management task. And the irony abounds in that. I chose to get a master's in public administration, and I've been uh, laughing and joking and saying maybe I should have gotten a master's in business administration because directing your own support, hiring your own staff, following up on your own services could be a full-time job. And I think part of the thing that I would think to be useful for anyone with autism is to figure out what they want to manage independently and what they're willing to ask for help with. And if the person is willing to sign a release of information, then you can help that person. You can find out information about their case, and then you can collaborate more effectively on that person's behalf. And so, one of the tips I would suggest is in preparation for the VR process, when you think about the person as a whole person, who in their life has different insights into what their strengths are. It may be a good idea after submitting the application to write a letter to a select group of individuals and say, you're an ally to me in this process of supporting my young person to go to work, and I would like you to sign a release of information so that we can have that in place so that in the discovery process you can be part of that. I don't know if that helps, but I hope so. And Janet asks if DVR is doing any job carving. Job carving is a piece of customized employment, and it's similar to what I was saying about, okay, there are pieces of this job that the person could do really well. Is the employer willing to carve out those pieces with the person so that they can do that work? I think some counselors are really good at that, and some aren't. Um, Not everyone is good at every skill, but you can also work with a vendor who has strengths in that area um, to work on that. And so I'm just kind of hoping that that is a good place. I wanted to just talk briefly about a couple bits of information, I suppose. And one is um, there's a handout or something that Beth uploaded that I made, which is called Peak General Advocacy PDF. And these are just some tips around organizing yourself for the VR process to meet with the most success and to have good options. And it talks about how to organize information, how to keep records, and how to strategies for following up. So I think that that's useful. I can come back another time, possibly to do a different webinar in different detail, but I think for now I'd rather make sure I've answered as many questions as I can. So is there anyone else who wants
Joelle,
to
this is
ask a
Beth.
question?
Can you hear me, Joelle?
It looks like Janet's gonna weigh in, and so I'm thankful for that. As I'm waiting for her to type, I just wanted to say that I do think that the more significant barriers that people have to expressing their potential, the more important it is to be getting started early and coming up with strategies to really showcase that person's strength. It's really everyone has strengths and everyone deserves to be considered holistically. And so Janet asks if you guys can contact me if you need help with the application process. You're absolutely welcome to contact me. I don't always do very well by email, and sometimes I'm I'm not always as fast to respond as I should be. But my telephone number is 303 866 4886, and my email address is Joelle, Joelle, Brouner. I'm sorry, dot Brouner at